Hey friends, Mary Rose here, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific on my YouTube channel. I'm so glad to be here today on this Wednesday. We're going to be talking about something that's actually quite a sensitive topic, and it's the idea of taking feedback on our work. I'm not going to call it a necessary evil because evil is not a kind word, but I think that we can all relate as writers to the complexity of both craving feedback and also dreading feedback. And then once we get the dreaded, craved feedback, we're not sure what to do with it. Am I right? So I see that some of you are here live, and I'm glad to see you. Hey, Chris. Hey, Cynthia. I'm waving hello at you and everybody else who's watching, whether you're here live or whether you're watching on the replay. I would love to hear your concerns, comments, fears, hopes, and dreams about the experience of getting feedback on your work. Now, there's a bunch of categories, a few categories, I shouldn't say a bunch, a few categories of the types of feedback that we can get on our work. And so I want to break this down a little bit because not all feedback is created equal. That's the first takeaway. Those of you that like to take notes, that's the first thing I want you to write down. Not all feedback is created equal. So today we're going to talk about the different kinds of feedback that are available to you and the potential benefits and pitfalls of each of them, because it is a little bit different. So before I get into this, let me just frame this by validating what you already know, but it's good to be validated, am I right? Feedback is hard. It's hard to hear feedback on our work. It is, I don't think it's a secret that all of us, no matter how diligent we are and no matter how confident and professional we may appear, when we give something that we've written to anyone else, whether it's, a close friend or an agent that we're hoping to impress or anybody in between, what we really want is for them to say, it's perfect, it's brilliant, right? It's really what we want. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in that. Those of you who might have watched the live stream that I did where I talk about my own long, strange, circuitous route to becoming a novelist, know that one of my great mentors in my youth, as I pondered, in total naivete and innocence, the possibility of having a life in the creative arts, was Stephen Sondheim, who, by the way, was giving interviews this week. He's in his early 90s. I forget exactly how old he is. I believe he might be 92, about the show that he's currently writing and expects to have up in New York next year. This is how artists age, my friends. Take that as a little bit of inspo. I was just delighted to see it. But Stephen Sondheim is an absolute genius, and his work has been lauded, and he is an icon in the musical theater. And so you can imagine how many people have beaten a path to his door asking for his blessing, his validation. Look, here, I wrote this. Is it any good? Am I any good? Should I keep at it? He's got such stature that one feels, that if he could just say, yes, keep going. You've got the right stuff, my friend. Like that would be life-changing. It would be life-changing to someone. So you can imagine at how often he's asked to go see things and look at things for people. And he's always been incredibly generous with sharing mentor energy. He has inspired my own practices as well in that regard. He's always been very generous about it. But he has been quoted as saying, and it's such good advice, that when you go to a theater performance and the writers come up to you And they've got that look in their eyes, like, what did you think? What did you think? Because there's literally only one thing you can say. It's the best thing I ever saw. That is the only thing you can say, because that's what they need to hear at that moment. Just say, it's the best thing I ever saw, give them a hug and go home, because this is no time. This is no time to say, well, about that, end of first act number, I think you could do better. And so that is, in fact, what we want. The master speaks truth, as masters tend to do. What we crave is being told it's great, not just okay. We want to be told that we haven't wasted our time trying to do this crazy thing called creative writing, right? That's what we want. And so I just want to frame that before we get into the nuts and bolts of actual critique, usable critique, the kind of critique we often rely upon when we plan our revisions, because we have to get that out of our systems. We have to have the self-awareness to know that on some level, we crave that rock bottom validation, that we're not wasting our time. I want you to learn how to get that validation and recognize it as a slightly different animal than critique. I'm going to pause for a second, because this is an important insight. I want you to take it in. Get the validation that you need somehow. Yes, this is a worthy practice. Storytelling is important. It's central to the experience of being human. This work is full of meaning. It's very worthy. It's worth your time. If you feel called to do it, you have to do it. It's part of who you are. To refuse that call to adventure would be to cut off some of your own journey to, fully actualize yourself. So be validated. Let me validate you right now. Take this like like those great parking coupons they hand out at offices in Los Angeles. They're always validating your parking, so you don't have to pay for it when you go to a meeting. I'm validating your parking right now, my friends. Welcome to the world of art. Like, you're artists, you're writers, you're creators. You're trying to make stuff, and you're not trying to make stuff only because it's fun and makes you feel better, but you're trying to make stuff out of a sense that you want to connect with others. It's important work. That kind of validation is not the same as feedback. It's not the same as critique. All right. So that's a big insight. I want you to take that one to the bank. Get validated, get those needs met. When you go to get critique or feedback on your work, it's something different. You're gathering data. You're gathering data, which you're going to decide how to use. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So, there's a couple of other things I want to remind you of. I did a whole talk about how to approach revision, and I think it's a useful one. And when I'm done with this talk, just make a note that you can revisit that one as well, to help you strategize how to take the things you learned from feedback and plan a revision out of them. So check out that talk as well. And there's also one that I did about why it's hard to share our work. I'm not going to recap everything that's in that talk, because we've got other stuff to talk about today that's specific to the experience of taking and giving critique. But just remember that it's very difficult to share our work. It makes us feel very vulnerable, and that the sensitivity that you're going to feel is inevitable. It doesn't mean that you're a neurotic mess. It doesn't mean that your friends are callous and rude. It doesn't mean that your critique partners have no tact. It just means that, yes, it's hard to share your work, and all this vulnerability goes along with it. So that's another video you might want to review. All right, my friends, are we ready? Yes. I'm going to talk about 3 different kinds of feedback first. The different categories of where you might be getting feedback and the qualities that they have, how they compare to each other. Let's start with what I'm going to call beta reader feedback. What's a beta reader? That's kind of a fancy term. It simply means that you're still working on the book. The book is not finished. The book is not done. You know that it's going to need more work. You're pretty sure it's going to need a little bit more work, but you're at the point where you just really crave having somebody read the whole thing. And chances are there are people in your life, and they may be loved ones. They may be a partner or maybe you've got grown kids or close friends, people who are cheering you on. They know that writing is really important to you. They're always offering, like, let me know if I can help. I'll take a look at it if you want. They're just so full of love and support. And it's great. It's really great. And they may even be trying to pry the manuscript out of you, even when you're saying, like, I'm not quite ready yet. But they're like, no, I want to read it. I really want to help. I'll tell you what I think. And, and so we put our books in the hands of the beta readers. So they're not the actual readers. This is the sort of the pre-release reader. This is someone that is volunteering or being persuaded to read your manuscript before it's actually ready to go to publication. Chances are you think it's going to need a little bit more work. So that's what I mean by a beta reader. Many writers love having beta readers. They might have like a trusted crew, maybe you're part of a group of writers that you swap manuscripts and you offer to do beta reads for each other. So that's, there's all kinds of ways to find beta readers if in fact you don't have them knocking on your door begging to read your manuscript. So what kind of feedback are you going to get from beta readers? Well, let me just start out by saying you have to acknowledge that it's a tremendously big thing to ask someone to do, to read a whole novel or a book-length manuscript that's not quite finished yet, that maybe needs a little trimming, that maybe needs a little polishing, that maybe even has some plot holes in it or it's not quite, all put together. It's a huge ask. It's a huge ask. It's actually very difficult to read something that's not working. And the well-intended, supportive beta readers in your life are going to do their best to support you and to fulfill their commitment to read it. But I just want you to be realistic about what it feels like to read something that's not engaging you, that's not fully working. It's a chore. It's really a chore. If you've ever tried to force yourself to read a book that just didn't interest you, it gets to be torture after a certain amount of time. I hope I'm not overstating the case. It's quite difficult. And there's all kinds of reasons that this is so. And I'm not going to digress into them so much, but it's a very intimate experience to read. We are, as readers, handing over the keys, if you will, to the car of our consciousness, to the book that we've chosen to read. We're replacing our own stream of thought with the stream of thought that the book is offering. It's quite intimate relationship, right? And so you're putting the book in the reader's brain. You're asking them to kind of push their own consciousness to the side a little bit so that you can run the show for them. And if it's not a good experience, just ponder a minute how deeply uncomfortable that is. Like, nobody wants to stay in that space. It takes a lot of effort. So why am I dwelling on this? I'm dwelling on this because don't you be so eager for beta readers that you prematurely give a manuscript that's a hot mess to people, because they're not going to have a fun time. And all you're creating is a lot of a sense of awkwardness in that they will not really know what to tell you. They're not going to have a good time. And what can they say to you? I didn't have a good time. It was impossible for me to read. I barely could finish it. No beta reader that knows you is going to tell you that. So right away, we have to go back to the advice of my mentor, Stephen Sondheim. All you can say to someone is, it's the best thing I ever read, hand it back to them and leave. That's useless to you, right? Because you have already discovered, either you already knew or you learned it today, that if what you're looking for is validation, don't make someone read your whole messy draft to get it. It's the wrong way. It's the wrong way to get it. A beta reader is useful if you feel that they have enough objectivity and a close enough relationship with you to say something like, I got halfway through and then I couldn't follow what was going on and I put it down, right? That's useful to you. It's that reader's experience. It may not be everybody's experience, but that might be useful to you. It might say, oh, okay, I got halfway through and I no longer knew what was going on. Maybe there's some clarity that you can improve in your storytelling, right? Like that might be a useful comment. As somebody who reads it and says, I thought it was very funny, that's very useful as well. Comedy is its own strange, delightful animal. And when we're trying to be funny in fiction, it's extremely helpful if other people say, yes, it's very funny. You know, when you're trying to be funny on a stage and you're doing comedy, if the audience laughs, it's funny. If the audience doesn't laugh, it wasn't funny. There's really no way to argue with this. But when it's fiction and you're writing what's intended to be funny, but there's no audience there to crack up at the joke, this can be a very particularly useful thing to get from a beta reader. They get the sense of humor. If you're trying to be funny and they don't recognize that it's supposed to be funny, that's useful for you to know. It's not good news, but it's useful for you to know. All right. If your beta reader is what I call a civilian, and I think most of the time beta readers are civilians. And by a civilian, I mean someone who's not another writer, who's not a colleague, not part of your critique group community, right? They're going to care about you too much to tell you much that's useful. Now, here's the danger also, is that if your beta reader, one of the reasons that they're so eager to be part of your process is that they are an aspiring or frustrated writer themselves. Watch out, because now you're in trouble. The beta reader is going to be so stimulated by your manuscript that they're going to come back to you with a list of 40 ideas. What if this happened? What if that happened? What if it happened this way instead? What if you changed the ending to this? Oh my goodness. They're going to have so many ideas for books that they want to write simply from the stimulating experience of reading your manuscript, that you're not going to know what to do, because it's going to be unclear, and it should be unclear, whether they're actually giving you suggestions for your book or whether they have just gotten 20 ideas for books of their own that they want to write based on being invited into your process. The other kind of feedback that beta readers can give that's useful and sometimes not useful is they'll say, it reminded me of ... So a well-read beta reader might be so eager to display some expertise that they'll say, you know, there's a book that came out last year that is like almost exactly like this. And they'll tell you this as if it's going to make you feel good. Most writers don't like being told that a book came out 6 months ago or a year ago or last week that basically has the same plot as the book that you've been slaving over for 2 years. It's not done yet. It doesn't feel good, right? But you will find beta readers that are just really eager to say, oh, you know what this reminds me of? So-and-so. Or they'll say, have you read this? You know, and so be careful, be careful. The enthusiasm of the civilian beta reader is a beautiful, loving thing, and it can, like, you can lose nights and nights of sleep over it. So am I saying that beta readers are a bad idea? I just advise you to proceed with caution. Know what you're getting into. Don't part with your manuscript if you really don't want anyone to read it yet. Don't hand it over to someone who's been peering over your shoulders and thinks that it's being supportive to say, can I read it? Can I read it? You know, if your initial impulse is, look, it's not done yet. I'm still working on it. I'll let you know when it's time to read it. Like that, stick with that. Stick with that. Because handing something that's very raw or that you're just not ready to hand over yet to someone who is a civilian is not necessarily going to make your relationship with that person better, and it's not necessarily going to give you actionable things. Now, if you've got people who are fairly savvy, who are really good readers, who have a bit of, writing experience, or maybe know the genre that you're writing in really well? See, that's a really good question. You want your book, if your book is in a particular genre, you don't want it just to be good for you. You want it to be good in terms of satisfying readers of that genre. If somebody comes to you for a mystery, you want to make sure that your mystery kind of ticks all the boxes of what satisfies a mystery reader. If someone's coming for you and you're saying, I'm offering a middle grade book, you want to make sure that you've got your category right. You don't want to, hand it to them and they say, I liked it, but it doesn't really feel middle grade. This feels like kind of adult, So that's a really good thing also. If you've got beta readers who are genre fans and you're writing in a genre, you can do a little genre check with them. So there's lots of things that can be productive about it, but just be careful. All right. Be careful of getting a lot of ideas given to you. Be careful of putting people in an awkward situation where they're going to try to find something to say to you, but they didn't really love it. And because maybe it just wasn't ready to be read yet. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just wasn't ready to be read yet by an outside reader. It's not done yet. You may have heard me say before on this channel that, part of the need for having a very good mindset as a writer derives from the fact that our work is always imperfect. We're always working on it. And it's not working, and we keep trying to fix it. We revise it a billion times. And when it finally is good and it's done and it works, it's done. And we hand it to someone else, give it to the reader, and then we start something new. So we are always dwelling in the land of looking at what we have in front of us that we wrote and being dissatisfied with it. It's a work in progress. When it's no longer in progress, it's finished. It doesn't need us anymore. It belongs to the reader now. We start something new. So just be aware that that the reader is you can wait for your reader until the manuscript is ready for them. All right, so that's enough about beta readers. And by the way, I've got the comment screen open here. And if anybody who's watching live, I see you've had a few more show up. It's good to see you guys. If you have experiences getting feedback or questions about taking or giving feedback that I can answer today, please post them in the comments, because I just think this can be kind of a hot topic. All right, so much for the realm of beta readers. Proceed with caution, be discerning, have realistic expectations about what you're going to get back. All right, those are the bullet points. Let's move up a notch now. I was bandying about the term civilian. I don't mean that in a criticizing way. I'm not qualified to give feedback about all kinds of things that I'm not a practitioner of. I'm a layperson, right? So I can't. So there's lots of things that I wouldn't dare give advice about. But I'm a practitioner of writing craft. I'm a practitioner of storytelling. I'm a professional. I'm skilled at it. So I know that I'm competent to give useful feedback about that. There's a kind of a middle ground of the critique group. Now, I know that you guys know what a critique group is. Probably most of you are in critique groups now or have been in critique groups in the past, or maybe you're looking to join a critique group. But for anybody who doesn't know, a critique group is a group of writers who form a mutual agreement to support each other's work while it's being written and revised. So this is not the same as beta readers, because the critique group usually is involved in your process while the draft is being written and revised. It's not that the critique group comes in when you've already got a finished draft. They tend to be involved as part of your journey. A very typical way for a critique group to be organized is that a small group who are all working on, often sort of similar things. You're all writing a novel, right? You wouldn't have a critique group where someone is doing watercolor paintings and someone is a sculptor and somebody's writing short stories, right? That typically is not how it goes. Although that would be interesting, don't get me wrong. But a critique group usually means that there's something similar about your endeavor. You're all writing fiction, you're all writing novels, you're all writing short stories, whatever it is. Some critique groups are even more specific. You're all writing kidlit. Maybe you've chosen to be in a critique group of people who are working on picture books or who are working on middle grade and YA. You just want to keep the group not necessarily identically pointed, but that there's enough in common that they can understand each other's work, So critique group forms, usually there's a schedule of meetings or exchanges if it's being done virtually. Some critique groups meet in person. Obviously, during the pandemic, all the critique groups met on Zoom, and this works great. Being in a Zoom hosted critique group is fine. Some critique groups never meet, and they just share like a Google Drive or a Dropbox. They exchange their documents, and they offer written feedback to each other. That can work too. So whatever you all agree on is fine. Maybe you say we exchange 5 pages and we do it once a month, or we meet once a week and show 2 pages, or we meet every other week and 3 of our members present, or and then the following week another 3 present. A group will find the rhythm and the workload that it can sustain. And when I say workload, I mean workload, because when you have a beta reader, you're giving them a job to do. They're sort of stuck with it, and now their job is to muddle through your manuscript to come back to you with feedback. When you're part of a critique group, it's an exchange. So they're reading your work and you're reading their work. And this very quickly adds up to quite a big commitment, right? So you have to create a schedule of exchange and feedback that is sustainable. It can't become a full-time job for the members of the group. Now, so critique groups are very different, as you can see. But the good part of a critique group, it offers things that a beta reader does not offer. And one of the things that it offers is the understanding that we're all doing this together, that there's a sense of community, collegiality, that you may be having a hard time with your rough draft, but guess what? So is everybody else. So it is validating, and it's very heartening. It's often very helpful to keep writers plugging away, because when you see other people having ups and downs and having the same struggles that you have, it takes the sense of self-absorption out of your suffering. You realize that the difficulties of writing good fiction are not personal. They're just part of what it's like to write good fiction. So here's what a critique group can give you: this sense of community, which I think is paramount. It's really, really valuable to so many people. It can give you a sense of accountability. And accountability is so powerful when you have scheduled to present a few pages at your critique group a week from Tuesday, and Monday night comes around and you realize that you didn't get around to your writing this week. Most of us have enough of a sense of, I don't want to show up empty-handed. I said I was going to present and I didn't do anything. That can be enough to really focus our attention. I don't recommend treating your critique group like you're a kid who's just continually doing your homework the night before, because that's not a sustainable writing practice. You want to make writing part of your lifestyle. You want to make it a lifestyle choice. You want to make it part of your, if not daily, part of your weekly routine. These 3 or 4 days a week, I know that I have this hour set aside. That's when I do my writing, or whatever works for your schedule works. It doesn't have to be every single day. That's such a myth. But even if it's, 3 hours on Saturday and half an hour on Wednesdays, like, you'll find your writing practice. But the thing is, if you know that people are waiting and you know that you're presenting next week, that kind of accountability is going to just help support you. It's going to help hold your discipline to get the work done. And I just want to have a shout out right now. And some of you, I think, are here live. I can't see the names of everyone who's here. I've got at least one who's just a Facebook user, but that's okay. I want to brag about my Path of the Storyteller students, because I have had groups go through the program who are now in the Storyteller Circle, which is the alumni group for Path of the Storyteller program. And we have had a cascade. It's been like dominoes falling of of writers finishing their drafts lately. Writers are finishing drafts of novels. Because they were part of a program, we met, they made a commitment to like making, writing a serious endeavor. Not that they weren't serious before, but you know, the expectation of working with a mentor who says, no, we're writing to get published now, folks. This isn't a hobby. Let's level up. Let's get it together, people. Let's start applying some pro-level techniques to the work, and let's start to see, you know, what it is that the really, really good writers might be doing a little differently than what you've been doing before. And so even making that commitment like releases a ton of energy, but the consistency of the critique groups meeting, the community that's rooting people on, like literally cheering for each other to cross the finish line of getting those drafts done and typing the end, even though we're visualized ahead, it's magical. I mean, I get really emotional when I think about it. And I'm happy. You know who I'm talking about, Chris, here in the comments, but I'm happy if you want to brag in the comments. But, you know, when I hear from a writer that they have finished a complete draft of a novel, and even though that they have been seriously working on writing and have been immersed in the world of literature for so long, and yet they have never managed to finish a manuscript before, but this time they got to the end. You know, that's what I'm all about as a mentor. That's what Path of the Storyteller is all about. And but the real credit, of course, goes to the writers themselves, the people in the critique groups who've been holding each other up, meeting consistently, cheering each other on. Like, it's so incredibly powerful to have somebody out there who knows you're going to finish your book, even if you've never finished a book before. It carries you across the finish line. You know, it carries you across. So I'm really, really proud of that. And that is what being part of a community, being part of a critique group, having that accountability can deliver. So what does this have to do with feedback? You thought I forgot? No, I did not. I did not forget, my friends. Getting feedback in a critique group can be incredibly valuable, and it can also be tricky. And here's why. If you're lucky, you will be in a critique group with writers who share a level of training that you do, who share a kind of a seriousness about the work that you do. And the feedback from people like that is going to make sense to you. But not every critique group has that advantage. And there is an interesting phenomenon, I'll call it, which is that untrained writers who have taught themselves how to do it, who are essentially writing by feel, they're writing by ear, you've heard me say, they all tend to make the same types of mistakes, which is extremely convenient when you want to teach people, because the mistakes are sort of easy to identify and easy to correct because everybody's making them. But because so many undertrained writers make the same kinds of mistakes, it creates a sense of, but this is how everybody does it. They're so commonplace. These mistakes are so commonplace that people think of them as technique. I hope this makes sense. It's like, if everybody's doing it this way, that must be the way to do it. And where I notice this is when I go, as I occasionally dare to do, to go into a Facebook group or go into some kind of group situation where people are posting writing questions and looking for answers, running things by their peers, who overwhelmingly tend to be, you know, these sort of undertrained writers. And the advice that they get is so terrible. And everyone jumps on and says, yep, exactly, that's how to do it. All right. You'll have 40 people saying exactly what she said is exactly right. And I'm shaking my head saying, no. You're describing with precision one of the things that all undertrained writers do. Just because all undertrained writers do it doesn't mean it's good writing. It's only good writing when it works for who? the reader, when it works for the reader. So there's a kind of a critical mass of bad writing advice that's out there. And so if you end up in a critique group where people are really steeped in this, you're going to be fighting upstream, you're going to be swimming upstream. And so you have to be discerning. But if you're lucky, there'll be a kind of a level of expertise in the group. And so you might get some tips. But don't expect a group to provide instruction, because that's not realistic. And if you are in a critique group, but you haven't had instruction, you might have put the cart before the horse, because they're not going to be able to help you, for the most part. These people are your peers. So it's sort of like, the kids are home and there's no grown-ups in charge. I don't mean this to be in any way to diminish, but if there's nobody there to elevate the level of expertise, you're just going to keep trading the same advice. That's the best that you know how to do, but that doesn't work, right? So there's a danger in a critique group where there's not a sort of a shared commitment to real craft, real training. So I talked about accountability, community. If you're lucky, you'll get some feedback that has, some serious writing chops behind it, some insights, but you have to be discerning, because you're just as likely to get bad advice as good advice. But here's where you will gain something valuable from being in a critique group. And let it be said, I'm a big fan of critique groups. The experience that you will have of reading other people's drafts that don't work and trying to figure out how to fix them is a really great way to sharpen your own discernment about what's working and what's not working on the page. And so the giving of critique is, in a way, one of the most beneficial parts of being in a critique group. So if you have pursued training and you've got a set of tools that are shiny and unused that you've been learning, there's a saying about how to gain mastery, which is you learn one, you do one, and then you teach one. So you learn a skill, right? You put the skill into practice, you do it, and then you teach it to somebody else. And by the time you've done those three things, chances are you really get it. But that third thing of sort of teaching it to someone else, in a way, is where it really comes home. So the critique groups offer that experience. When we give feedback to others and we're really mindful about the kind of feedback we give to others, we gain a benefit from it. So the third category of feedback that you might find yourself dealing with is professional feedback. Now, what do I mean by professional feedback? We're not talking beta readers. We're not talking your critique group partners. We're talking about a few different circumstances, actually. Perhaps you decided to hire a professional editor or a writer who mentors, or somebody who's at a pro level who does critiques, who does manuscript critiques. Maybe you're paying for a manuscript critique and you're going to get a pro level manuscript critique. Or maybe you're in a program where you have a pro mentor who looks at your pages, once a quarter or once a semester, or, however that works, whatever program that you're in. Some MFA programs or certificate programs have that, where you're assigned a mentor who looks at what you do and gives you notes. Another way that you might get professional feedback is if you submit your work to agents and editors. Maybe you do it through a query letter, or maybe you do it in a conference situation where you sign up to show a few pages to somebody, who's there at the conference representing the industry, their agency, their publishing house. Now, here's the thing. You can assume that this pro-level feedback is of a higher quality. And you can assume that. But here's what I want you to consider. When you have pro-level feedback, especially if it's the kind that comes at a conference where it's a kind of a quick relationship, and maybe you're showing 5 pages to an agent and you're going to have 15 minutes with them or something, you will definitely learn what they think. But you should not expect that you're going to learn how to fix it. And this is important because you're going to get a reaction from a professional. And particularly in these short form, I looked at your first 5, I looked at your first 10 pages. You're going to get their professional response. This is very valuable information for you in terms of how to market your book. And you may, in fact, learn that your first 5 or 10 pages are just not that engaging. They're not ready for prime time yet. That's useful for you to know. It's not fun to find out, but it's useful for you to know, isn't it? You'd rather know than not know. But here's what you are almost certainly not going to learn. You're not going to learn how to fix it. And I caution you, and I'm going to talk about this for another minute or two, but then we're going to dive into like what to do with the notes that you get. You might have the experience of being with a pro who has the discipline to say, this is what I saw, this is what I felt, this is what I failed to feel, and who might just give you that report of their experience and leave you to sort out what you make from it. But in an effort to be helpful, you are probably going to have someone say, well, maybe if you tried this, it would make it better. And they're going to start pitching suggestions. And the suggestions that they give you are not necessarily any more valuable than what you're going to get from your critique group or your beta readers. They just don't know your intentions well enough. And here's the other thing. And I'm traditionally published. I'm very grateful for my relationships, my professional relationships in the industry. And so I have nothing but regard for editors and agents. But editors and agents are not, for the most part, writers. Some of them do double duty. But for the most part, they're not writers. And to expect them to give you writing advice is not realistic. Editors can, they can tell you how to do a profit and loss statement, and they can talk about the marketplace and the acquisitions committee, like the things that they are masters of, they can tell you about. But if your editor has never written a book, they can tell you what it's like to be a insightful reader. And they can look at it in terms of, is this a fit for the marketplace? Is this a fit for my imprint? Is this a fit for my publishing house? But they're not going to be able to tell you how to fix it because they're not writers. It's not their area of expertise. And so please remember that writing is an area of expertise. Writing is your area of expertise. It's your job to make writing your area of expertise so that when you go into a room and you're the only writer in the room, that any notes that come from people who are not writers are for your information only, but you are the one who's going to figure out, okay, as the writer, what do I glean from all of this? Okay. So I'm going to go back a little bit to the notion of paying for a manuscript critique from a pro, because that can be a different experience. If you find the right person who gets your work and who's going to read the whole thing and who's really going to give you notes, and that person is a writer. If there are writers out there who do manuscript critiques, it's a very big job to do a proper manuscript critique, but if you get a great one, this can be very helpful if it's someone that you trust. So that can be useful. But again, there's a lot of people out there freelancing giving manuscript critiques. There's a ton. Please do not say, oh, this one's only $200. I'll take that one. Like, who is that person? What have they written? Please don't get a manuscript critique from someone whose own writing you have not read. All right. I mean, that's just bottom line. Don't get manuscript critiques from, I'm even going to go so far as to say there's a lot of editors and agents who might freelance doing this. These are not necessarily the people who are going to help you the most. That's my opinion. That's the world of opinion. I'm going to put a little bracket about that. But I do think that for really getting to the nitty-gritty of what's going on, you should find a senior writer who's willing to kind of roll up sleeves and bring their attention to bear on your work in a very serious way. That kind of manuscript critique can be worth paying for. All right. So now that we've framed this whole landscape, let me just sort of sum up what are your defenses? What are your strategies for protecting yourself, for making the most of the critique you get? Well, one of the things that we can glean from all of this is that you must be discerning about who you asked for feedback. And you must be realistic about what they have to offer. Okay, be discerning. If your great aunt wants to support your work and says, I'm going to read it, if you feel like that's going to be good for your relationship with your great aunt, you can let her read it, but just be realistic that unless your great aunt is a terrific novelist, maybe she is, wouldn't that be wonderful? That you might come back and hear, oh, I loved it. If you hear I loved it, it was great. It's my favorite book. I'm going to tell everybody about it. Just take the love. That's so sweet. That's so wonderful. I'm just not sure where you're going to go with that, just in terms of feedback. Just be discerning, be realistic about what they have to offer. This is super important. This next tip, please ask for what you want. And this is true, especially in a critique group context. You do not have to subject yourself to everybody's opinions about every aspect of your work. You may have brought a scene into your critique group that you know that you haven't described anything, you haven't revised the prose. You're just trying to figure out what happens in the scene. Please tell your critique group partners, help me with the storytelling. What I need you to do is read this and feed back to me if you can tell what happens in the scene, if you can find the moments of the scene where the hero's fortune changes, if you can tell what's different at the end of the scene than at the beginning, right? Like if they can identify the beats of storytelling in the scene for you, that's helpful. And if they can't identify them, that's even more helpful, right? Because then you know what's missing. And stick to your guns. That's what you're asking for today. When some well-intentioned person says, but you know what? I think this dialogue exchange is going on too long, or what if you tagged it differently? Like, that's not what we're talking. We're not talking dialogue tags today. You haven't looked at those yet. You're going to fix those later. Stick to your guns. Ask for the feedback that's of use to you. Stay in control of the process. It's your work in progress. You must be, this is another talk that I did that you might want to revisit. You must be the boss of your book. If not you, then who? Your critique partners are there to help you, but they are not the bosses. Don't let the power structure flip. And I don't say this because I want you to be arrogant, unpleasant people. That's not it at all. I want you to take ownership of your creative work so that even when you go into a critique group, it does not feel like a job interview where you're sitting there and you've got a table full of experts who are all going to now scold you and tell you what you did wrong. That's the wrong power structure. Flip it, right? You are the CEO of Book Inc. And you have this staff of experts, and you're going to ask them specifically to weigh in on various things. You're going to take everybody's recommendations. You're going to say, thank you very much. Look forward to our next meeting. And then you're going to take it all and you're going to decide what to do with it. So anybody who's out there who the idea of getting critique makes you feel like you're being called before a tribunal, please flip it. Flip that image in your head. You are the CEO. You are sitting at the head of the table of the board meeting, and you're bringing in your SWAT team of experts who are there to help you. All right. When you're done with them, dismiss them, put your feet up on the desk, and decide what to do next. And when it comes to deciding what to do next, here's a tip. Take an average of the comments that you get. Don't let one person's opinion outweigh everything else that is said. You may find that there's a conversation because, your critique group partners are smart, and they may get into, like, they may leave you in the dust inadvertently by saying, what if this happened? What if this happened? What if this happened? What if this happened? And you might let the conversation roll a little bit because it's interesting to you, and maybe some of these ideas are helpful, but take an average of them. If everybody says, something to do with the end of the scene, but they can't agree on what it is, just say, well, they all have a problem at the end of the scene. I wonder what it could be. I'll be the one to figure out what it is. But just sort of look for those themes in the comments. Once again, they will end up shining lights on particular places or problems, but they won't necessarily give you the right solutions. And here's my next tip. Don't rush to change the things that you're told to change. Find the real problem instead. Don't change the things you're told to change. Find the real problem instead. Did you hear that I said that twice? What did I mean by this? Here's an example. There are so many. I'm just going to give one. You might hear from people, I read it. It was okay. I just didn't really like the main character. I don't know. I just didn't like her. I just didn't really like her, And so if you take that at face value, you're like, I got to make her more likable. And so you sort of take out all of her annoying qualities and you get rid of all her flaws. And then maybe you add a scene where she's super nice. You add description where it's just she's always smiling or something. Like, you might rush to try to fix this comment, but it's possible that she's not likable. And so what you need to do is you need to find the real problem, which is that this character, who's maybe not likable, not supposed to be likable, like, I don't know, let's say Ebenezer Scrooge, not supposed to be likable. But if you don't find Ebenezer Scrooge likable, it's fine. But what you do need to do as a reader is you need to have insight into the dramatic question of, oh boy, this guy's a hot mess. He's going to have to completely change. And I bet that's what this book is about. And I can't wait to see how it happens. You have to realize that your unlikable character needs to be more psychologically visible to the reader so that they get it, so that they understand, like, oh, this is a book about how the worst person in the world becomes the best person in the world. I have to read this, right? So that's a pivot that a skilled writer can make. You find the real problem instead. This not likable note is just such a commonplace one that I use it as an example, but there are many, many kinds of notes that fall into that category. Don't take them at face value. Find the real problem instead. And my last tip for what to do with notes is don't automatically think of them as a list of things you must add to your manuscript. Please don't. Very often we find, in fact, it's a human trait. There's scientific studies about this. You know me and my science, that when humans have to solve a problem, our initial instinct is to add something, like, oh, that's loose, let me add a piece of tape, or that's got a leak in it, like, let me put a patch on it. We tend to solve problems by adding complexity to the system. Writers are just like this. And so you might come out of a critique group and somebody says, well, I really wish that I knew more of what her room looked like. And then someone else will say, I didn't really like her that much. And someone else will say, I wasn't clear about what happened here. And someone else will say, I found myself curious about what the weather was like. And like, there'll be like a whole bunch of notes that none of them are actually really that useful, but you've got a list now and you're like, okay, that's 10 things I need to add to the scene. And you'll go in and you'll add a description of the weather and description of her outfit, description of the room. You'll put dialogue tags on everything just to be extra clear. The people who weren't sure what the main character was feeling, well, you'll just add lots of inner monologue now where she's just telling the reader high and low what she's feeling. In other words, you're going to make it much worse. You're going to take your scene and you're going to add all the things that people told you that they were thinking about, and you're going to be making it worse, not better. The solution in good fiction to problems is as likely to have to do with subtracting things as it does with adding things. That is probably the topic for a whole other live stream, right? So I'm not going to belabor it, but just take this notion of, don't take critique, don't take feedback as a grocery list of stuff that you've got to get and shove into your manuscript. Chances are that is not going to make it any better. Find the real problem and fix that. So those are some tips about what to do with the feedback you get, but I would be remiss not to give you quick tips, just another minute's worth, on giving feedback that's useful. And they're going to parallel in some ways the tips for what to do with the feedback that you got. But the top one I would be, that I urge you to remember, is if you're asked to give another writer feedback, give them what they ask for. And if you are not sure what they're asked for, ask them. Ask them, do you want me to look at the storytelling? Do you want me to keep an eye out for, excess or repetition? Tell me what you're looking for so I know what to look for. And, that author may never have realized that they're in charge of your critiquing efforts, and they may be very grateful. If they say, oh, I don't know, just anything you see, like, that's good and bad, because they're abdicating being the boss of their book. So you then might say, well, I'm going to choose a couple things that I think might be helpful to you and focus on them. It makes it a little easier for you, and ultimately it'll be better for them. So give the writer what they ask for. Second tip on giving feedback, try not to pitch. What do I mean by pitching? This is when you start to rewrite their book. When you read their book about, a girl growing up on your farm, and you're like, you know what? I just couldn't help myself from wondering, what would it be like if she moved to Chicago? Like, wouldn't that be interesting? Like, wouldn't you love to see her coping with the big... So now you're pitching, right? You're pitching your idea for a book, because this poor friend of yours or critique group partner was vulnerable enough to say, here's the book I wrote about a girl on a farm, and all of a sudden you're pitching your idea. Resist it. It's very tempting. We're creative people. These things come out of our mouths. If you catch yourself pitching, reel it back in, all right? If the writer says, I'm out of ideas, help me brainstorm. Can we spitball? These are great things. That's different. That's an invitation to brainstorm, like, some plot points or whatever. Writers do that kind of stuff all the time. But if you're just being asked for feedback, please don't pitch your own idea for a book. And the third tip that I have for you is, when in doubt, ask questions. It's very helpful. It's very helpful to simply ask questions of the writer. You can read it and you can say, I'm curious about, this. I'm curious about, in this scene, what impact this scene has on the character. I'd like to know more about this. Asking questions, it makes you look like a genius, right? Because it puts you in a kind of a Socratic role where you're just helping the person that you're giving notes to, you're helping them think more clearly about their own work. And that's the best gift that you can give them, because they know their own work better than you know it. So if you try to fix it for them, maybe you'll be helpful, maybe you won't. But if you can find ways to ask helpful questions about what they're showing you and have a nice conversation about that, or if they're exchanging written feedback, write down your questions and provide them. You cannot go wrong, my friends. All right, that is enough for today. I hope that was of benefit. The process of giving and taking feedback, or taking feedback, was really our main topic today. I just want to remind you also that it never ends. When you're a beginner, you take feedback. When you are mid-level, trying to break into the business, the publishing industry, you're taking feedback. When you're a professional, you've had lots of books published, you're taking notes. So, it happens. It's part of our experience. And the best way that you can protect yourself, honestly, is to just make yourself the expert in the room. Know more about writing than the non-writers who are giving you notes. Invest in your expertise. Okay? Level up. Ultimately, it's what's going to be the most comfortable stance for you to take. It doesn't mean that you close your ears to what other people are saying, but it does mean that you don't feel like you're being summoned before a tribunal all the time. You have a special relationship with your creative process and your creative work. It's unique and it's personal, and you should honor it, take it seriously, and protect it. All right. Oh, I'm just seeing now some thank yous. Great to see you, Terry. I'm delighted that you were here. Cynthia, great to see you here as well. All right, my friends, have a wonderful week. Happy writing. I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Remember, if you have a question or a request for a topic that you want me to talk about on Wednesday, just leave it in the comments. Reach out to me. You can get on the mailing list at pathofthestoryteller.com, and we can get into an email conversation, however you want to let me know, because I'm very eager to address the kinds of things that keep you up at night and try to, bring some clarity to those issues. Writing good fiction is a very complicated practice. There's a lot of facets to it, so we're never going to run out of things to talk about. But if I can be of service to you about something that's on your mind, just let me know. Have a great week. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.